Hello, A-Push classes. This is something I'm going to try because I'll be giving the same explanation to all four sections of A-Push. Regarding chapter 3 in the book By the People and your key terms that you're looking at here, the Halfway Covenant, the Puritans, the Separatists, the Mayflower Compact, the Joint Stock Company. One of the themes that is implied only in chapter 3 is the influence of Calvinism on the Bible Commonwealth and the Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts. The Separatists first, and then the Puritans were greatly influenced by the Swiss theologian John Calvin. And Calvinism has a particular set of rigid doctrines, one of which is predestination. Predestination has a category in it called election or the select, so that, very briefly, it was held that in the Puritan community and in the Separatist community, there were those who had been pre-selected, predestined to succeed, and were covenanted members of the church. And it was the Congregationalist church. And the idea that they were fully covenanted meant that they could run the colony. One of the comments by John Winthrop, when he wrote his sermon called A City Upon a Hill, was that the Massachusetts Bay Colony would carry out the will of God and would be seen by the rest of the world as exceptional, as having been chosen. Should they break that agreement or that covenant with God, then they would lose the respect that an exceptional group of people deserved. And so, should they lose the respect that they had earned by breaking this covenant with God, then they would be down among the damned and the lowly. Just any common citizen, person. And so this idea that somehow the Bible Commonwealth was an exceptional undertaking became a very popular belief, that somehow it had been chosen by God, and an agreement existed between the Puritans and the Separatists and God, and they could not break that covenant. This is important because of the four requirements to participate in the affairs of the colony, one had to be a white, male, fully covenanted member of the church and a property owner. White, male, covenanted member of the Congregationalist church and an owner of property. These four requirements were the prerequisites to participating in the affairs of the colony and to be a member of the general court. Eventually, over time, those four requirements will be whittled away The very first one will be the religious requirement. The idea that certain people were among the elect and that they were the chosen also implied that they had to act as visible saints. This very strict requirement eventually will lead such freethinkers as Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson to question the theocratic nature of the Plymouth colony. John Cotton was a Puritan minister, and he described what he believed should be the ideal form of government in this theocracy. And I'll read this to you. This is from John Cotton's response to a number of questions on the Bay Colony. It is better that the Commonwealth be fashioned to the setting forth of God's house, which is his church, than to accommodate the church frame to the civil state. Democracy I do not conceive that ever God did ordain as a fit government either for church or commonwealth. If the people be governors, who shall be governed? As for monarchy and aristocracy, they are both of them clearly approved and directed in Scripture. Yet so as referreth the sovereignty to himself, and setteth up theocracy in both, as the best form of government in the commonwealth, as well as in the church. So clearly, he's favoring a certain group of elect or chosen to set forth God's house, rather than to accommodate God's house to the civil state. One of the tenets of Calvinism that underlies the Bible Commonwealth, as I mentioned earlier, is that there is a certain group of people who are chosen, who are the elect, who must, of course, behave well as visible saints. But those that are predestined have a certain moment of enlightenment where they realize they are among the chosen. This idea that there are a certain group of successful people who best represent the government will lead later to a group of people during the Progressive era or the Gilded Age, Carnegie and Ford and Rockefeller and the Vanderbilts, who believe that they are, the Fords and the Firestones too, the chosen, that they have been selected. And Rockefeller famously said, God gave me my money. This is, the hand of God is evident here in my selection. What this does, of course, is create those who feel that they are among the chosen and those who are among the damned. And that is the two pews that were set up in the Congregationalist Church. The Congregationalist Church had pews for the elect or the chosen, the visible saints, and pews for the damned, and they were separate. This predestination comes from John Calvin, the Swiss theologian, as I mentioned earlier. And there is a section from the Institutes of Christian Religion that reads, "The covenant of life is not preached equally to all, and among those to whom it is preached, does not always meet with the same reception. This diversity displays the unsearchable depth of the divine judgment and is without doubt subordinate to God's purpose of eternal election. If it is plainly owing to the mere pleasure of God that salvation is spontaneously offered to some, while others have no access to it, great and difficult questions immediately arise, questions which are inexplicable when just views are not entertained concerning election and predestination. To many, this seems a perplexing subject, because they deem it most incongruous that of the great body of mankind, some should be predestined to salvation and others to destruction. It would seem to be a normal reaction. If I'm not among the chosen, if I'm among the damned, then what hope have I? I mean, it's over, right? It was already decided. This is what Anne Hutchinson does. She raises this question. She's mentioned in your book, and there's a statue honoring her on Boston Common because she did question this. Hutchinson said that she herself received direct revelations from God. This is on page 71 of your textbook. She had moved beyond what the Puritans would tolerate, and she was banished from the colony. She was so bold as to think that God also spoke to her. But she was not among the covenanted. And so God only spoke to the covenanted, or full members of the church. And because she questioned that about the theocracy in so many words, Anne Hutchinson was questioning predestination and this idea of a group of white male property owning covenanted members of the church as the fonts of wisdom. She was banished for that. They put her on trial, and they found her guilty of what is known as antinomianism. Roger Williams, who eventually founds Rhode Island, had the same conflict with this rigid idea of predestination. I bring this to your attention because it's not very well covered in the book, and yet it is a theme that runs through American history. A little bit more from John Calvin and the idea that there are a group of chosen people. How causelessly we entangle ourselves will appear as we proceed. We may add that in the very obscurity which deters them, we may see not only the utility of this doctrine, but also its most pleasant fruits. I'm going to skip down a little bit. We arrive at the knowledge that God saves whom he wills of his mere good pleasure, and does not pay a debt which never can be due. What he's saying there is that God has chosen a certain group, and you cannot bribe him or her or it, this almighty power, through good works or an attempt to understand where you might have gone astray. It is already decided, it's already been ordained. There will be those who are among the chosen, and they will have the ultimate reward of going to heaven. And then there are those who are among the damned, and they will go to hell. And that is the very stark reality of Calvinism and of the Congregationalist Church. Eventually, as people begin to move westward, and they're the second and third generations, the covenant tends to be weakened, and the halfway covenant is arrived at. In other words, to maintain membership through some sort of a compromise that says, well, your parents were covenanted, and you can be covenanted too halfway. The idea, of course, was to continue monetary support for the church because money had to be paid to this established church. And the reason I say this is because in the very First Amendment, we have in there the phrase, Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. This is a direct result of the strict rules of the Bible Commonwealth based on Calvinism that failed, essentially. Ann Hutchinson questioned them. Roger Williams questioned them. People began to wonder, well, heck, if I'm among the damned, if I don't really have a chance here, it's already been predetermined, why shouldn't I just lead any kind of life I like? Why shouldn't I question the wisdom of the elders? And so that is how the Bible Commonwealth began to weaken. And eventually, as I say, we end up with a separation of church and state. A theocracy in this country cannot work, and especially a theocracy that is supported by tax dollars. That is what an establishment of religion means. And so when people say, oh, this is a Christian country, it is not. It is not a Muslim country. It is not a Hindu country. It is not Jewish. Any religion you choose should not have any form of precedence over any of the others. And that is the lesson we learn from the failure of the Bible Commonwealth and the beginnings of the questioning of theocratic government, as John Cotton explained it. The questioning of it that leads to its demise. It was a failed experiment. The people had good intentions, but you cannot impose a certain religion on civic affairs because people have different perspectives. And so that's one aspect of this chapter that has not really been covered, but they do mention Roger Williams and they do mention free-thinking Ann Hutchinson, who was driven out of the colony for her antinomianism. And Roger Williams was driven out, and he founded Rhode Island, where there was religious tolerance and freedom. Maryland, as another example, was supposed to be a tolerant colony. It was for Catholics. It was a haven for Catholics. Maryland was a haven for Catholics, but not for Jews. They were not welcome there. So straight away, we run into the problem of religion and beliefs. And to this day, there are those who think that they may have been blessed because if you hear it sometimes in some religious traditions, God wants you to be rich. Jesus wants you to be rich, or, collect all you can unto yourselves. You're justified in doing that. And if you're justified in doing that, and then you're successful, then that's a sign that God has smiled upon you. It's in the tradition of the robber barons. They believed this was the work of God. Rockefeller famously said it. And so when we combine the idea that we are an exceptional country, the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and that somehow we are the last great hope of democracy, or we are a city upon a hill, or we are to be seen as the leaders of the world, that is an echo of those early Calvinistic influences that have come down to us from the Puritans and the Bible Commonwealth.